When three entitled bullies decide to humiliate the quiet new substitute teacher, they have no idea they're about to mess with someone whose husband fights America's most dangerous enemies overseas. What happens next will leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about strength, respect, and the power that lies beneath a gentle exterior. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled across the sleepy streets of Cedar Falls, Oregon, a picturesque town nestled between rolling farmland and dense pine forests. The kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where Friday night football games drew the entire community, and where change came slowly, if at all. Lincoln Middle School sat at the heart of town, its red brick facade weathered by decades of Pacific Northwest rain, surrounded by towering Douglas firs that swayed gently in the October breeze. Inside classroom 204, 28 eighth graders shuffled into their seats, their voices creating the familiar buzz of preteen energy mixed with Monday morning reluctance. At the front of the room stood Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, with shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were modest but neat, a navy cardigan over dark slacks, comfortable flats that made no sound as she moved around the room, arranging papers on her desk. Sarah had been the substitute math teacher at Lincoln Middle for only 3 weeks, filling in for Mrs. Henderson, who was on extended medical leave. To the students and faculty, she was simply another temporary face in a revolving door of substitutes. Quiet, competent, unremarkable. She kept to herself during lunch breaks, graded papers with meticulous attention to detail, and never raised her voice above a gentle but firm tone when managing the classroom. What none of them knew was that Sarah's husband, Staff Sergeant Marcus Mitchell, was currently on deployment with SEAL Team 7 somewhere in the Middle East. The wedding photo tucked discreetly in her desk drawer showed a man with steel gray eyes and the kind of presence that commanded respect without saying a word. They'd been married for 6 years, and in that time, Sarah had learned more about survival, strategy, and silent strength than most people learned in a lifetime. Marcus had insisted on teaching her things during his time home between deployments. "You never know what might happen when I'm gone," he'd say, his voice gentle but serious as he showed her how to assess threats, how to use everyday objects for protection, how to remain calm under pressure. It hadn't been about paranoia, it had been about love, about a husband wanting to ensure his wife could handle whatever life threw at her. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she now found herself in a different kind of battlefield, one where the weapons were words and social media posts, where the enemy wore designer clothes and carried smartphones. Instead of rifles. At the back of the classroom sat the trio that had made her first weeks at Lincoln Middle particularly challenging. Derek Hoffman was the undisputed leader, a tall 14-year-old whose father owned 3 car dealerships in the county. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his clothes expensive, and his attitude reflected the privilege that came with never being told no. His parents' donations to the school made him practically untouchable, and he knew it. To his left sat Ashley Burke, a girl whose beauty was matched only by her cruelty. Her long blonde hair was always perfectly straightened, her makeup applied with the skill of someone twice her age, and her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. She wielded social media like a weapon, destroying reputations with carefully crafted posts and strategic rumors. The third member of their group was Connor Walsh, Derek's loyal follower since elementary school. Not quite as tall or handsome as Derek, but equally entitled and twice as eager to prove himself worthy of the friendship. His nervous laugh punctuated most of Derek's jokes, and his phone was always ready to record whatever humiliation they planned next. Together, they'd perfected the art of psychological warfare against anyone they deemed unworthy of their respect. Teachers were frequent targets, especially substitutes who didn't understand the unspoken power structure of Lincoln Middle School. Sarah, had noticed their behavior from day one. The way they whispered just loud enough to be disruptive, but not loud enough to be clearly heard. How they'd drop pencils and make unnecessary noise during her lessons. The eye rolls, the smirks, the way they'd lean back in their chairs with arms crossed, radiating disrespect. She'd also noticed something else, the fear in the eyes of other students when Derek's group was around. Kids like Emily Rodriguez, a quiet girl with thick glasses who loved math, but rarely participated anymore since Derek had started calling her Nerd Alert every time she raised her hand. Or David Chun, whose stutter had worsened noticeably whenever Ashley would mimic him just loud enough for nearby students to hear. Sarah had tried the conventional approaches first. Gentle redirection, private conversations after class, even a call to Derek's parents that had resulted in nothing more than a dismissive "boys will be boys" response from his mother. The school administration, she quickly learned, walked on eggshells around the Hoffman family and their financial contributions to the district. On this particular Monday morning, as Sarah wrote algebraic equations on the whiteboard, she could feel the tension building behind her. Derek and his friends were whispering more intensely than usual, their phones hidden under their desks. She recognized the signs. They were planning something. Who can solve for x in this equation? Sarah asked, turning to face the class. Emily's hand started to rise, then quickly dropped as Derek made a soft snorting sound. "Nobody cares about X, Miss Mitchell," Derek said, his voice carrying the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "We all know you're just here until the real teacher gets back." A few students snickered nervously. Sarah maintained her calm expression, her training kicking in automatically. Assess the threat. Don't react emotionally. Stay in control of the situation. "The equation is still on the board if anyone would like to try," she said evenly, moving to stand beside her desk. Ashley's perfectly manicured hand shot up. "I have a question, Miss Mitchell. Is it true that substitute teachers only get paid like minimum wage? Because that would totally explain why you shop at Target instead of somewhere decent." The comment was designed to humiliate, to establish dominance through public shame. Sarah felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest, the same feeling she got when Marcus would tell her about the tactics insurgents used to try to break down American soldiers' morale. "Let's focus on mathematics, Ashley," Sarah replied her voice steady. Connor, emboldened by his friend's attacks, decided to join in. "My mom says substitutes are just people who couldn't get real teaching jobs. Like, if you were actually good at something, you wouldn't be here." The classroom had gone completely silent now. 25 other students watched with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident, unsure whether to look away or lean in closer. Emily Rodriguez stared at her desk, her face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. David Chun's fingers tapped nervously on his notebook. Sarah moved closer to Derek's row, her movements fluid and controlled. Up close, she could see the expensive watch on his wrist, the designer logos on his clothes, the confidence that came from a lifetime of getting his way. "Is there something specific about today's lesson you'd like to discuss, Derek?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of something the students couldn't quite identify. Derek leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, meeting her gaze with the kind of defiance that would have made most adults step back. "Yeah, actually. I want to discuss how boring your class is. Like, seriously boring. My dad says I don't have to put up with incompetent teachers just because the school can't afford to hire real ones." The silence stretched between them. Sarah's hazel eyes never left Derek's face, and for just a moment, something flickered there, a hardness that seemed at odds with her gentle exterior. It was the look of someone who'd seen real adversity, real danger, and wasn't impressed by teenage posturing. "I see," she said finally, her voice soft but carrying an undertone that made several students sit up straighter. "Well, Derek, incompetence is definitely something worth discussing. Perhaps we should talk about it after class. Derek's confidence wavered slightly, but Ashley and Connor were watching, and backing down wasn't an option. Whatever. You can't make me stay after class anyway. My parents will just call the principal. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering his words. You're probably right about that. The admission seemed to restore Derek's swagger. He glanced at his friends who grinned back at him, and Sarah could see the wheels turning in his head. He'd found another adult he could push around, another authority figure who would cave to his family's influence. But Sarah wasn't done talking. Of course, respect isn't something that can be bought or inherited, she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the silent classroom. It's earned through actions, through how we treat others, especially those who can't fight back. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's face reddened slightly, but before he could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of class. Students began gathering their books, the tension breaking as they focused on the logistics of getting to their next period. Derek, Ashley, and Connor took their time packing up, clearly planning something. Sarah could see them exchanging glances, their phones appearing and disappearing like weapons being checked and rechecked. As the last of the other students filed out, Derek approached Sarah's desk. Ashley and Connor flanked him, their formation practiced and intentional. You know what, Miss Mitchell? Derek said, his voice dripping with false politeness. I think you need to learn to respect yourself. Maybe someone should teach you how things really work around here. Sarah looked up from the papers she was organizing, her expression serene. Is that so? Yeah, Ashley chimed in, her phone now openly in her hand. Like, maybe you should understand that some families in this town actually matter, and some people are just ... temporary. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The threat was clear, even wrapped in teenage vernacular. Sarah had seen this before. Not in classrooms, but in Marcus's stories about psychological operations, about enemies who tried to break down resolve through intimidation and threats. She stood slowly, her 5'6" frame seeming somehow more substantial than it had moments before. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. You know, kids, I've learned something interesting over the years. The people who talk the most about power are usually the ones who understand it the least. Derek stepped closer, invading her personal space in a move calculated to intimidate. Maybe you should worry less about teaching us and more about keeping your job. Wouldn't want anything ... unfortunate ... to happen to your reputation. The words were barely out of his mouth when Sarah did something unexpected. She smiled. Not the nervous, placating smile of an intimidated substitute teacher, but something else entirely. Something that made Connor take an unconscious step backward. Unfortunate things, she repeated softly. Yes, I imagine they do happen. Especially to people who don't know when they're in over their heads. The three students exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. There was something in Sarah's tone, something in the way she carried herself, that didn't match the meek substitute teacher they thought they'd been bullying. But Derek had gone too far to back down now, and his friends were watching. He moved even closer, close enough that Sarah could smell his expensive cologne, close enough that his next words were clearly meant as a final intimidation. Listen carefully, lady. My family owns this town, and I own this school. You're nothing. Here, just remember that. Sarah looked up at him, her hazel eyes steady and unblinking. For a moment, the classroom was absolutely silent except for the sound of the heater clicking on and the distant noise of students in the hallway. Then, in a voice so quiet that Derek had to lean in to hear it, Sarah said something that would change everything. Derek, you have no idea who you're talking to. The words hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down on an ancient battleground. Derek's confident smirk faltered for just a moment as he processed Sarah's quiet declaration, but teenage arrogance quickly reasserted itself. He'd never met an adult who didn't eventually cave to his family's influence, and he wasn't about to start believing in fairy tales now. "Oh, really?" Derek said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he pulled out his phone. "And who exactly are you supposed to be? Some kind of secret agent?" He laughed, a sound designed to diminish and mock. Ashley and Connor joined in, their laughter echoing off the classroom walls. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved to her desk and began methodically placing papers into her bag, her movements precise and economical. There was something almost military in the way she organized her space, though the students were too caught up in their own sense of power to notice. "You know what I think?" Ashley said, stepping forward with her phone raised. "I think Miss Mitchell here is having some kind of breakdown. Maybe we should record this for everyone to see what happens when substitutes crack under pressure." The red recording light blinked to life on Ashley's phone, and Sarah's eyes flicked toward it briefly. In that instant, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Marcus had taught her about surveillance, about being recorded without consent, about how information could be weaponized. The knowledge sat in her mind like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment. "That's actually a good idea," Connor chimed in, emboldened by Ashley's initiative. "We could put it on TikTok." "Crazy. Teacher thinks she's tough. It would probably go viral." Derek grinned, sensing victory. "Perfect. Let's see what our mysterious substitute teacher is really made of." He moved closer, invading Sarah's personal space more aggressively now. "Come on, Miss Mitchell. Tell us your big secret. What are you going to do? Grade us harshly? Give us detention?" Sarah finished packing her bag and looked up at the three students. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was something in her eyes that made Connor's nervous laughter die in his throat. She stood slowly, and for a moment, the teenagers felt something they weren't used to experiencing: uncertainty. "You really want to know who I am?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the room. "I'm someone who's learned that real strength doesn't come from intimidating people who can't fight back. Real strength comes from protecting those who need it most." Derek rolled his eyes. "Oh, spare us the after-school special speech. You're nobody, and you know it. Just another temporary nobody who'll be gone in a few weeks." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "But while I'm here, things are going to be different." As she moved toward the door, Derek made a crucial mistake. Driven by frustration and the need to maintain his dominance in front of his friends, he reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with enough force to stop her forward motion. "We're not done talking," he said, his voice hard with barely contained anger. The classroom went absolutely silent. Ashley's phone continued recording, capturing every second of what happened next. Connor shifted nervously, suddenly aware that they might have crossed a line they hadn't intended to cross. Sarah looked down at Derek's hand on her arm, then back up at his face. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that Ashley had to lean forward to catch the words on her recording. "Take your hand off me, now." There was something in her tone that made the hair on the back of Connor's neck stand up. It wasn't the voice of a frightened substitute teacher. It was the voice of someone who had faced real danger and emerged victorious. But Derek was too far committed to back down. His grip tightened, and he leaned closer. "Or what? You'll call the principal? My parents? Face it, lady, you've got no power here." Sarah's response was swift and decisive. Her free hand moved with surgical precision, applying pressure to a specific point on Derek's wrist that Marcus had shown her years ago. The technique was designed to cause immediate compliance without lasting damage, a method used by military personnel to subdue uncooperative subjects without escalating the violence. Derek's hand sprang open involuntarily, and he stumbled backward, clutching his wrist with a look of shock and confusion. "What the hell? Pressure point," Sarah said matter-of-factly, adjusting her bag strap. Very effective for dealing with people who don't understand boundaries. Ashley's phone had captured everything, but she was too stunned to speak. Connor's mouth hung open as he stared at his usually invincible friend, rubbing his wrist and looking genuinely rattled for the first time in their friendship. Derek's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and, finally, a cold fury that his friends had never seen before. You can't do that to me. Do you know who my father is?" "Yes," Sarah replied calmly. "He owns 3 car dealerships and donates money to the school. That information was in your file." She paused at the classroom door. "What you don't seem to understand is that none of that matters when you put your hands on someone without permission." The implications of her words settled over the trio like a heavy blanket. Ashley finally found her voice. "We have it all recorded. Everyone's going to see what you did to Derek." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, your recording will show Derek grabbing me against my will, and me defending myself using minimal force. I'm sure the school administration will find that very educational." For the first time since elementary school, Derek found himself at a loss for words. The dynamic had shifted in ways he didn't understand, and the confident superiority he'd worn like armor was cracking under the weight of an unfamiliar reality. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "No," Sarah agreed quietly. "I don't imagine it is." As she left the classroom, the 3 students remained frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. Derek continued rubbing his wrist, not from pain but from the shock of being physically outmaneuvered by someone he'd dismissed as weak and inconsequential. "Did you see her face?" Connor whispered. "Like when you grabbed her?" "It was like she wasn't even scared." Ashley replayed the video on her phone, watching the sequence of events unfold in slow motion. "Look at this," she said, zooming in on Sarah's expression. She knew exactly what she was doing. That wasn't lucky or accidental. That was professional. Derek sank into his chair, his teenage understanding of power and hierarchy suddenly feeling inadequate. "My wrist doesn't even hurt," he said, more to himself than to his friends. "But I couldn't control my hand. How did she do that?" The questions hung unanswered as the second bell rang, signaling that they were now late for their next class. But none of them moved. The encounter had shaken something loose in their worldview, and they needed time to reconstruct their understanding of the quiet substitute teacher they'd tried to intimidate. Meanwhile, Sarah walked down the hallway toward the main office, her mind already working through the implications of what had just occurred. She knew Derek wouldn't let this go. His type never did when their sense of superiority was challenged. The situation would escalate, and she needed to be prepared for whatever came next. As she passed other classrooms, she caught glimpses of students and teachers going about their normal routines, unaware that the careful balance of power at Lincoln Middle School had just shifted. Some of the students she passed looked at her curiously. Word traveled fast in middle school, and whispers were already beginning to circulate about something happening in room 204. In the main office, Principal Janet Foster looked up from her computer as Sarah approached. Mrs. Foster was a tired-looking woman in her late 50s, who'd been running Lincoln Middle for nearly 2 decades. She'd learned to pick her battles carefully, especially when it came to influential families like the Hoffmans. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said with a professional smile, "how was your morning?" "Eventful," Sarah replied, taking a seat across from the principal's desk. "I thought you should know that Derek Hoffman grabbed my arm during class today, and I had to defend myself." Principal Foster's smile faltered. "Oh dear, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine," Sarah assured her. "But I wanted to document the incident before his parents' call." The principal sighed heavily. Sarah could see the weight of political considerations settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. What exactly happened? Sarah recounted the events in precise, factual terms, leaving out nothing but adding no editorial comments. She described Derek's escalating behavior, the threats, the recording, and finally the physical contact and her response. "He grabbed you?" Principal Foster asked, leaning forward. "Actually put his hands on you?" "Yes," and his friend Ashley recorded the entire encounter on her phone. A flicker of something, relief perhaps, crossed the principal's face. "Well, that's actually helpful. If there's video evidence of him initiating physical contact." She trailed off, but Sarah understood. The school had been walking on eggshells around the Hoffman family for years, but assault was assault, regardless of how much money someone's parents donated. "I don't want to make this a bigger issue than it needs to be," Sarah said carefully. "But I also can't allow students to think it's acceptable to put their hands on teachers." Principal Foster nodded, already reaching for her phone. "I'll need to call Derek's parents and have them come in. And I'll need a copy of that video from Ashley. This is exactly the kind of situation I've been worried about with that group." As Sarah left the main office, she felt her phone buzz with a text message. Her heart lifted when she saw Marcus's name on the screen, a rare communication from overseas, carefully timed to coincide with her lunch break. "Hey beautiful, thinking about you. How's the teaching going? Any troublemakers I need to worry about?" Sarah smiled despite everything, typing back quickly. "Nothing I can't handle. Miss you. Stay safe. Always do. Love you." The brief exchange reminded her why she was really here, not just to substitute teach, but to build a stable life for when Marcus returned from deployment. Cedar Falls was supposed to be their fresh start, a place where they could put down roots and maybe start a family. She wasn't about to let a group of entitled teenagers derail that dream, but as she walked toward the cafeteria for lunch, Sarah was already anticipating the next phase of the conflict. Derek Hoffman had never been told no in his life, and he certainly wasn't going to accept defeat from someone he saw as beneath him. The recording Ashley had made would be both a blessing and a curse, evidence of Derek's inappropriate behavior, but also a document of Sarah's own capabilities that would raise uncomfortable questions out in the cafeteria. Sarah noticed the subtle changes immediately. Conversations quieted when she passed certain tables. Students' eyes followed her with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Word was spreading, as it always did in schools, and she could almost hear the whispered conversations. "Did you hear what happened in Mitchell's class? Derek Hoffman got his butt kicked by the sub. I heard she's like a secret martial arts expert or something." Sarah took her usual seat at an empty table near the window, unpacking the simple lunch she'd brought from home. As she ate, she observed the social dynamics playing out around her. The students who'd been Derek's victims, Emily Rodriguez, David Chun, and others, sat a little straighter, spoke a little louder. The popular kids who usually orbited Derek's group seemed uncertain, no longer sure where the power really lay. Across the cafeteria, she could see Derek, Ashley, and Connor huddled together at their usual table, their heads bent over Ashley's phone. They were undoubtedly watching and rewatching the video, trying to understand what had happened and planning their response. Sarah finished her sandwich and pulled out the novel she'd been reading, a thriller about a woman trying to escape her violent past. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she'd always found comfort in books where ordinary people discovered extraordinary strength when circumstances demanded it. As she read, she became aware of someone approaching her table. Looking up, she saw Emily Rodriguez standing nearby, clutching her lunch tray and looking nervous but determined. "Mrs. Mitchell," Emily said quietly, Could I sit with you?" Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Of course." Emily sat down carefully, as if she wasn't sure this was really happening. "I just wanted to say thank you. she said in a rush, "for what you did in class today. Derek has been, well, he's been really mean to a lot of us, and nobody ever stands up to him." "Everyone deserves to feel safe at school," Sarah replied simply. "Is it true?" Emily asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What people are saying about you knowing martial arts and stuff?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I know some self-defense techniques. But more importantly, I know that bullies usually back down when someone doesn't act afraid of them." Emily nodded eagerly. "My mom always says that, but it's hard when you're scared all the time." "Being scared is normal," Sarah said. "The trick is not letting fear control your actions." As they talked, Sarah noticed other students beginning to gravitate toward their table. David Chun joined them, still stuttering slightly, but with more confidence than she'd seen from him before. Two other students who'd been frequent targets of Derek's group pulled up chairs, and suddenly Sarah found herself at the center of an impromptu gathering of the school's underdogs. "Are you really married to a Navy SEAL?" one of the students asked, and Sarah realized that rumors were spreading faster than she'd anticipated. "My husband is deployed with the Navy," she said carefully, neither confirming nor denying the specifics. "He's serving our country overseas." The students nodded, with a mixture of awe and understanding. In a small town like Cedar Falls, military service carried significant respect, and Sarah could see the students' perception of her shifting from weird substitute teacher to something approaching heroic. But as lunch period wound down and students began clearing their tables, Sarah caught sight of Derek Hoffman near the cafeteria entrance. He was staring directly at her, his expression dark with a mixture of anger and something else, a kind of calculating coldness that reminded her uncomfortably of the enemy combatants Marcus had described in his letters. Derek said something to Ashley and Connor, and all three of them looked in her direction. Ashley held up her phone and made a gesture that Sarah recognized as threatening. They weren't done with her, if anything. The morning's confrontation had only escalated their determination to prove their dominance. As the bell rang, and students began filing out for afternoon classes, Emily Rodriguez lingered at Sarah's table. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said hesitantly, "be careful. Derek's dad isn't just rich, he's kind of scary when he gets angry, and Derek's just like him." Sarah smiled reassuringly, but Emily's warning echoed in her mind as she gathered her things and headed for her afternoon classes. She dealt with one confrontation successfully, but she knew from Marcus's training that the first battle was often just a test of an opponent's capabilities. The real fight usually came later, when the enemy had time to plan and prepare. As she walked down the hallway, Sarah felt the familiar hyper-awareness that Marcus had taught her to cultivate in potentially dangerous situations. Every face in the crowd was assessed and categorized. Every unusual sound was noted and analyzed. Every potential threat was identified and filed away for future reference. She was no longer just Sarah Mitchell, substitute teacher. Whether she liked it or not, she was now Sarah Mitchell, target. And if Derek Hoffman and his friends wanted to escalate this conflict, they were about to discover that they'd chosen the wrong person to mess with. The gymnasium fell into stunned silence as Derek Hoffman sat on the floor, tears streaming down his face, his carefully constructed image of invincibility shattered like glass on concrete. The entire school community, students, parents, teachers, and school board members stared in disbelief at the scene before them. The untouchable golden boy of Cedar Falls had been reduced to a sobbing child, not by violence or humiliation, but by the simple power of truth and consequence. Sarah Mitchell stood calmly beside the microphone, her posture relaxed but alert, watching as the full weight of Derek's actions finally crashed down upon him. She felt no satisfaction in his tears, no triumph in his defeat. Instead, she felt the quiet resolve of someone who had done what needed to be done. Nothing more and nothing less. Principal Foster was the first to break from her shocked paralysis, moving quickly across the gymnasium floor toward Derek. But it was his father, Richard Hoffman, who reached him first. The powerful businessman who had built an empire on intimidation and influence knelt beside his son, his own face pale with the realization of how completely his world had just changed. "Derek," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Get up. We're leaving." But Derek couldn't stop crying. The weight of everyone's stares, the knowledge that hundreds of people had just witnessed his complete breakdown, the understanding that his reputation at Lincoln Middle School was permanently destroyed. It was all too much for his 14-year-old mind to process. "I can't," he sobbed. "Everyone's looking. Everyone knows." Mrs. Henderson, who had been watching from her wheelchair near the side of the stage, spoke into the microphone with gentle authority. "Students, please return to your classrooms in an orderly fashion. The assembly is over." But nobody moved. The revelation that their quiet substitute teacher was married to a Navy SEAL, had survived a terrorist attack, and possessed skills most adults could only dream of had fundamentally altered their understanding of strength, courage, and what it meant to be a hero. They needed time to process this new reality. Sarah stepped back to the microphone one final time. "Before you go," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent gymnasium, "I want you to remember something important. What happened here today wasn't about me proving how tough I am. It was about showing you that real strength comes from protecting others, standing up for what's right, and having the courage to face the truth about yourself." She looked directly at the students who had been Derek's victims: Emily Rodriguez, David Chun, Marcus Thompson, and others who had suffered in silence for so long. "Every single one of you has more courage than you realize. You don't need special training or military experience to stand up for yourselves and others. You just need to remember that you matter, that you deserve respect, and that you're stronger than anyone who tries to make you feel small." Emily Rodriguez, sitting in the third row with tears in her eyes, nodded slowly. For the first time since Derek had started tormenting her, she felt something other than fear when she looked at him. She felt pity, and somehow, that was more powerful than any revenge could have been. As students finally began filing out of the gymnasium, conversations buzzed with excitement and amazement. The story of Sarah Mitchell would become legend at Lincoln Middle School, the substitute teacher who had taken down the biggest bully in school history without throwing a single punch. But for Sarah, the real victory was quieter and more personal. As she gathered her things from the podium, she felt her phone buzz with an incoming call. The number was international, scrambled through military channels, and her heart leaped when she realized what it meant. "Marcus," she breathed into the phone, stepping into the relative privacy of an empty corridor. "Sarah, thank God," came her husband's voice, crackling with static but unmistakably warm with relief. "I just got word about what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she assured him, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Better than fine, actually. I handled it." "I never doubted you would," Marcus said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "But I wish I could have been there with you." "You were," Sarah replied softly. "Everything you taught me, every lesson about staying calm under pressure, every technique for reading situations and people, you were with me through all of it." There was a brief pause, filled with the static of an encrypted connection spanning thousands of miles. "I'm coming home," Marcus said finally. "My deployment's being cut short. I should be back in Cedar Falls within the week." Sarah's breath caught. "Really?" "But your mission is complete," Marcus finished, "and my family needs me home. The Navy understands that." As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in months. The crisis at Lincoln Middle School was resolved. Her marriage was about to be reunited, and she had proven to herself that she could handle whatever life threw at her, even without Marcus by her side. But the real changes were just beginning. to unfold throughout the school and community. Richard Hoffman's business empire, built on a foundation of intimidation and political influence, began crumbling within days of the assembly. Parents who had previously been afraid to cross him suddenly found their voices, filing complaints about his son's behavior and questioning his family's influence over school policy. 3 major clients canceled their contracts with his dealerships, citing concerns about family values and community standards. More significantly, the school board launched a comprehensive investigation into the bullying culture at Lincoln Middle School. Principal Foster, freed from the political pressure that had constrained her for years, implemented new policies that empowered teachers to address harassment immediately and effectively. Derek himself underwent a transformation that surprised everyone, including his parents. The complete destruction of his social status forced him to confront aspects of his personality he had never examined before. With the help of a counselor and the constant supervision of his chastened parents, he began the long process of making amends for his actions. His first step was a written apology to every student he had ever bullied, delivered personally and accompanied by genuine remorse. The letters were awkward and imperfect, but they represented a real attempt to acknowledge the pain he had caused. "Emily," he said one morning, approaching her locker with obvious nervousness, "I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. For everything. You never deserved the way I treated you." Emily looked at him for a long moment, studying his face for signs of deception or manipulation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "I hope you mean it." "I do," Derek said quietly. I'm going to transfer to a different school, start over somewhere else. But I wanted to apologize first." The news of Derek's transfer sent ripples through the student body, but perhaps the most surprising reaction came from Emily herself. Later that day, she approached Sarah after class with a request that demonstrated her own remarkable growth. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, "I've been thinking about what you said during the assembly, about having courage and standing up for others. I want to start a club, something for kids who have been bullied, where we can support each other and learn to be stronger." Sarah smiled, seeing in Emily's determined expression an echo of her own journey toward self-empowerment. "I think that's an excellent idea. Would you like help getting it started?" Within a month, the Courage Club had become one of the most popular organizations at Lincoln Middle School. Students who had previously suffered in silence found their voices, sharing their experiences and developing strategies for dealing with harassment and intimidation. The club's influence spread beyond the school, inspiring similar organizations at other institutions throughout the district. Ashley Burke and Connor Walsh faced their own reckoning. Without Derek's leadership and protection, they were forced to confront the roles they had played in the bullying hierarchy. Ashley, whose social media cruelty had been as devastating as any physical assault, found herself ostracized by the same platforms she had once used to torment others. The experience taught her lessons about empathy and consequence that no adult lecture could have provided. Connor, always a follower rather than a leader, struggled initially with the loss of his social identity, but freed from the pressure to constantly prove his loyalty to Derek, he discovered interests and friendships he had never been allowed to explore. He joined the school's chess club and found that he had a genuine talent for strategic thinking, a talent that had been wasted on planning pranks and harassment. The transformation of Lincoln Middle School became a model for other institutions dealing with similar problems. Educators from across the region visited to study the techniques that had been implemented, particularly the emphasis on empowering victims and creating accountability for aggressors. But perhaps the most significant change occurred in Sarah herself. The crisis had forced her to integrate the different aspects of her identity: the military spouse, the educator, the protector, the healer. She was no longer trying to hide from her past or compartmentalize her experiences. Instead, she had learned to draw strength from all parts of her life, When Marcus finally returned home, he found a wife who was both familiar and transformed. She was still the gentle, caring woman he had married, but there was a new confidence. In her bearing, a quiet authority that came from having faced a real crisis and emerged victorious. "You've changed," he observed as they sat together on the porch of their small house, watching the autumn sun set over the Cedar Falls Valley. "We both have," Sarah replied, taking his hand. "The question is whether we've changed in the right direction." Marcus squeezed her fingers gently. "Tell me about the students," he said. "The ones you were protecting." Sarah's face softened as she spoke about Emily's Courage Club, about David Chun's newfound confidence, about the way the entire social dynamic of the school had shifted toward kindness and inclusion. "They didn't need me to save them," she said. "They just needed someone to show them they were worth saving." "And the bullies?" Marcus asked. "What happened to them?" "They learned that actions have consequences," Sarah replied. "Some of them are trying to do better. Others are just trying to avoid making the same mistakes again. But either way, they're not hurting anyone anymore." As the weeks passed, Sarah's role at Lincoln Middle School evolved beyond that of a substitute teacher. Principal Foster offered her a permanent position, which she accepted with the understanding that she would also serve as a mentor for students dealing with bullying and harassment. Her first official workshop was attended by more than 50 students, all eager to learn the lessons she had to offer. But rather than teaching them combat techniques or self-defense moves, she focused on something more fundamental: self-respect, situational awareness, and the courage to seek help when needed. "The goal isn't to turn you into fighters," she explained to the group. "The goal is to help you understand your own worth and develop the confidence to stand up for yourselves and others." Emily Rodriguez, now the president of the Courage Club, raised her hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, what if someone is too scared to stand up? What if they feel like they'll just make things worse?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Fear is normal," she said. "I was scared during the assembly too. But fear becomes a problem only when it prevents us from doing what we know is right. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help from a trusted adult." The workshop series became so popular that parents began attending as well, eager to understand how they could better support their children. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial community liaison, helping families navigate the complex social dynamics that their children faced at school. One evening, as she was preparing materials for the next workshop, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Richard Hoffman stood on her doorstep, his expensive suit replaced by simple jeans and a button-down shirt, his usual commanding presence diminished by obvious humility. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice lacking its former arrogance, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to talk to you about Derek." Sarah invited him in, curious about what the man who had once threatened her job might have to say. They sat in her modest living room, the contrast between their lifestyles evident but no longer intimidating. "He's in therapy," Richard said without preamble, 3 times a week. "And he's volunteering at a homeless shelter on weekends. Court-ordered community service." Sarah nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I need you to know," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I take full responsibility for what my son became. I taught him that money and influence were more important than character. I showed him that intimidation was an acceptable way to get what you want. I failed him as a father. What matters now is what you do going forward," Sarah replied gently. Richard nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "He asks about you sometimes, about how you stayed so calm when he was hurting people. He wants to understand how someone can be strong without being cruel." "Strength and cruelty are opposites," Sarah explained. "Real strength is about protection and service. Cruelty is about fear and weakness. Would you—" Richard paused, struggling with the request. "Would you be willing to talk to him? Not as his victim, but as someone who might help him understand what real character looks like. Sarah considered the request carefully. Derek Hoffman had caused tremendous pain to many students, and part of her felt that he should face the consequences of his actions without her help. But another part of her, the part that had chosen teaching as a profession, the part that believed in redemption and second chances, recognized an opportunity to truly complete the healing process. "I'll think about it," she said finally. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself sitting across from Derek Hoffman in the counselor's office at Lincoln Middle School. The arrogant teenager who had once terrorized his classmates was gone, replaced by a young man who struggled to meet her eyes and spoke in halting, careful sentences. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I was doing to people like Emily and David and Marcus. I was trying to make them feel as small as I felt inside." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and the beginning of real self-awareness. "What do you plan to do with that understanding?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Derek admitted. "But I want to find a way to help people instead of hurting them. Maybe work with kids who are going through what I went through. You know, having parents who care more about winning than about doing what's right." It wasn't a complete transformation. Real change would take years, possibly decades. But it was a beginning, and Sarah recognized the courage it took for a teenager to admit such fundamental flaws in himself and his family. As spring arrived in Cedar Falls, Lincoln Middle School had become a different place entirely. The hallways that had once echoed with whispered fears now rang with laughter and open conversation. Students who had been silent for years found their voices. Teachers felt empowered to address problems before they escalated. Parents became more engaged in their children's social and emotional development. Sarah's final day as a substitute teacher was marked by an impromptu celebration organized by the students themselves. Emily Rodriguez presented her with a handmade card signed by more than 200 students and staff members. David Chun, who now spoke without stuttering, gave a speech about courage and kindness that brought tears to many eyes. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Mrs. Henderson, fully recovered from her illness and ready to return to her classroom, pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I've been teaching for 35 years, the veteran educator said, "and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished here. You didn't just stop a bully, you changed an entire culture." "The students did that," Sarah replied. "I just showed them they had the power to change things themselves." As Sarah cleaned out her temporary classroom for the last time, packing away the personal items that had made the space feel like home, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Cedar Falls seeking quiet anonymity, hoping to build a peaceful life while waiting for her husband's return from deployment. Instead, she had discovered that running from the past was impossible and unnecessary. Her experiences as a military spouse, her training in survival and protection, her understanding of strategy and psychological warfare, these weren't burdens to be hidden, but gifts to be shared with those who needed them most. Marcus found her there as the sun was setting, standing in the empty classroom and looking out the window at the students walking home from school. They moved differently now, with more confidence, more awareness of their own worth, more willingness to include others in their groups. "No regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "None," Sarah replied, leaning back against his chest. "This is what we train for, isn't it? Not just to survive a crisis, but to help others survive theirs." "So what's next?" Marcus asked. "Principal Foster offered you that permanent position." Sarah smiled, watching as Emily Rodriguez helped a younger student who had dropped her books. And David Chun invited a shy new student to join his group of friends. "I think," she said slowly, "that our work here is just beginning." Outside the window, the flag in the school courtyard fluttered in the evening breeze, a symbol of the freedoms that Marcus and his fellow service members fought to protect overseas, and that Sarah had learned to defend in her own way on the home front. The battle against bullying and intimidation would never be completely won, but today, in this small town in Oregon, they had proven that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they found the courage to stand up for what was right. The legend of Sarah Mitchell would live on at Lincoln Middle School, inspiring future students to find their own strength and use it in service of others. But for Sarah herself, the real victory was quieter and more personal. The knowledge that she had honored her husband's service by serving others, and that she had found a way to be both a protector and a healer, both a warrior and a teacher. As they walked home together through the peaceful streets of Cedar Falls, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that came not from defeating enemies, but from building allies. The greatest battles she had learned weren't won with superior force, but with superior character. And in that battle, she and Marcus were just getting started. 3 months after the assembly, Sarah received a letter that would forever change her understanding of the impact one person could have on an entire community. The envelope bore the official seal of the Oregon Department of Education, and inside was an invitation that left her speechless. "Mrs. Mitchell," the letter began, "you have been nominated for the State Teacher Excellence Award for your extraordinary contributions to anti-bullying initiatives and student advocacy. Your innovative approaches to conflict resolution and character development have gained statewide attention, and we would be honored to have you speak at our annual education conference." Marcus read the letter over her shoulder, his pride evident in his smile. "National recognition for my warrior teacher wife," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I think the Navy could learn a thing or two from your tactical approach to winning hearts and minds." The invitation led to opportunities Sarah had never imagined. Within 6 months, she was consulting with school districts across the Pacific Northwest, sharing strategies for identifying and addressing bullying before it escalated to crisis levels. Her approach, which she called protective teaching, emphasized empowering potential victims while providing clear consequences and rehabilitation paths for aggressors. But perhaps the most meaningful development came from an unexpected source. Derek Hoffman, now 16 and attending a private school in Portland, had maintained regular correspondence with his former victims through a restorative justice program. His letters, initially awkward and clearly supervised, had evolved into genuine expressions of growth and accountability. One autumn afternoon, Derek appeared at Sarah's new office at the district headquarters, accompanied by his counselor and carrying a thick portfolio. He had grown taller, his face had lost its childish arrogance, and his eyes held a seriousness that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice steady but respectful, "I've been working on something for the past year, and I wanted to share it with you." The portfolio contained detailed plans for a peer mentoring program designed specifically for students who exhibited bullying behaviors. Derek had researched similar programs across the country, interviewed counselors and educators, and developed a curriculum that addressed the root causes of aggressive behavior while providing constructive outlets for leadership tendencies. "I know I can't undo what I did," Derek said as Sarah viewed his work, "but maybe I can prevent other kids from making the same mistakes. My counselor says that people who've been through trauma can sometimes help others in ways that people who haven't experienced it can't." Sarah was impressed by the thoroughness of his research and the genuine insight his proposals demonstrated. "This is excellent work, Derek. Have you shared this with your current school?" "They're implementing a pilot program next semester," he replied. "But I was hoping ... I mean, I know I don't have the right to ask, but would you consider being an advisor? Your endorsement would mean everything to the schools I'm trying to reach." The request represented a full-circle moment that Sarah hadn't anticipated. The Young man who had once terrorized her classroom was now seeking her guidance to help others avoid his path. After consulting with Marcus and her own counselor, Sarah agreed to advise Derek's program with clear boundaries and professional oversight. Second Chance Leadership Initiative, as Derek's program became known, proved remarkably effective. Students who had been disciplined for bullying behaviors were given opportunities to channel their leadership tendencies into positive directions. Peer mediation, conflict resolution training, and community service projects that built empathy and social awareness. That one of the program's first success stories was Connor Walsh, who had remained at Lincoln Middle School and struggled with his identity after Derek's departure. Under the guidance of the new program, Connor discovered that his talent for reading social dynamics could be used to identify and prevent conflicts before they escalated. He became one of the school's most effective peer mediators, helping other students navigate the complex social hierarchies that had once seemed so important. Ashley Burke's transformation took a different path. The experience of losing her social media influence had initially devastated her, but with time and counseling, she developed a deeper understanding of the damage that online harassment could cause. She began volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helped victims of cyberbullying, using her technical skills and insider knowledge of social media manipulation to help others protect themselves. "I spent 2 years learning how to destroy people online," Ashley told a group of parents during one of Sarah's community workshops. "Now I'm spending however long it takes to learn how to protect them instead." The ripple effects of Sarah's intervention at Lincoln Middle School continued to spread in ways both large and small. Teachers who had witnessed her calm handling of the crisis began incorporating her techniques into their own classroom management strategies. Parents started having different conversations with their children about power, respect, and the difference between strength and intimidation. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a child psychologist who had been brought in to evaluate the long-term impacts of the changes at Lincoln Middle School, published a case study that attracted national attention. Her research documented measurable improvements in academic performance, attendance rates, and student mental health indicators that persisted more than 2 years after the initial intervention. What Mrs. Mitchell accomplished goes beyond typical anti-bullying programs, Dr. Reeves explained during a presentation at a national education conference. She didn't just stop negative behaviors, she transformed the entire social ecosystem of the school by empowering students to see themselves as protectors rather than victims or aggressors. The success of the Cedar Falls model led to invitations for Sarah to consult with schools dealing with similar problems across the country. She and Marcus developed a traveling program that combined her educational expertise with his military background in leadership and team building. Their first major consulting project took them to a struggling high school in inner-city Detroit, where gang influences and systemic violence had created an environment of fear and mistrust. The challenges were different from those at Lincoln Middle School, but the underlying principles remained the same: identify natural leaders, empower potential victims, and create consequences with pathways to redemption. The techniques you learn in military operations, Marcus explained to a group of teachers during their first workshop, aren't just about combat. They're about understanding human behavior under stress, building trust with local populations, and creating sustainable change that continues after you leave. Sarah added, "Every classroom is a community, and every teacher is responsible for the safety and growth of every member of that community. But you can't do it alone. You have to teach the students to take responsibility for each other." The Detroit project required 6 months of intensive work, but the results were dramatic. Incidents of violence dropped by 70%, academic performance improved across all grade levels, and teacher retention rates increased significantly as educators felt more supported and effective in their roles. Word of their success reached the Pentagon, where military family support services were struggling with similar issues in schools on military bases. Children of deployed service members often faced unique challenges related to frequent moves, parental absence, and the stress of having family members in combat zones. Sarah and Marcus were invited to develop a specialized curriculum for military base schools, drawing on their personal experience as well as their professional expertise. The program, called Military Family Resilience Training, taught children coping strategies for deployment stress, while addressing the bullying behaviors that often emerged from feelings of powerlessness and fear. Military kids are incredibly resilient, Sarah observed during one of their training sessions, but they're also carrying burdens that civilian children can't understand. Sometimes what looks like aggressive behavior is actually a cry for help from a child who's afraid their parents might not come home. The program's success led to its adoption across multiple military installations, and Sarah found herself testifying before a congressional subcommittee about the unique needs of military families and children. Her quiet confidence and practical insights impressed lawmakers from both parties, leading to increased funding for military family support programs. But even as their work gained national recognition, Sarah and Marcus remained grounded in the personal relationships that had started their journey. They maintained regular contact with the students from Lincoln Middle School, celebrating graduations, college acceptances, and personal milestones with families they had come to love. Emily Rodriguez, now a high school senior and president of her school's student council, was planning to major in social work with a focus on youth advocacy. "Mrs. Mitchell showed me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak," Emily said during her valedictorian speech. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves." David Chun had overcome his stutter completely and was heading to college on a debate scholarship. His transformation from terrified victim to confident public speaker served as an inspiration to other students dealing with speech difficulties and social anxiety. Marcus Thompson, the shy student who had found his voice through Sarah's encouragement, was now studying to become a teacher himself. "I want to be the kind of teacher who sees every student as having potential," he said during a visit to Sarah's office. "The kind who believes in kids even when they don't believe in themselves." Even Derek Hoffman's story continued to evolve in positive directions. His Second Chance Leadership Initiative had been adopted by more than 50 schools across 3 states, and he was planning to study psychology and criminal justice in college, with the goal of working with at-risk youth. "I'll never be able to completely make up for what I did," Derek told Sarah during one of their quarterly check-ins. "But maybe I can spend the rest of my life trying. My counselor says that's not about guilt anymore, it's about purpose." As Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple substitute teaching assignment, she marveled at how profoundly her life had changed. She had discovered that the skills Marcus had taught her for survival could be equally powerful tools for healing and growth. The annual memorial service for victims of the terrorist attack that had changed her life had once been a day of mourning and survivor's guilt. Now it has become a day of gratitude and renewed commitment to using her experiences to help others. She and Marcus attended together, placing flowers at the memorial wall and renewing their vows to honor the memory of those lost by continuing to serve others. "They died protecting innocent people," Sarah said softly as they stood before the memorial. "The best way we can honor them is to keep protecting innocent people in whatever way we can." Marcus squeezed her hand, his own eyes bright with tears. "I think they'd be proud of what you've accomplished. Sarah, you've probably saved more lives with your teaching than I have with my military service." As they prepared to return home to Cedar Falls for the weekend, Sarah received a text message that perfectly captured the ongoing impact of their work. It was from a teacher in Phoenix who had attended one of their workshops 6 months earlier. "Mrs. Mitchell, I wanted you to know that the techniques you taught us just prevented what could have been a serious incident at our school. A student who had been displaying warning signs was able to get help before anyone was hurt, because other students felt empowered to speak up. Thank you for showing us that prevention is always better than reaction. Sarah showed the message to Marcus as their plane taxied toward takeoff. Another life changed, she said with quiet satisfaction. Another community made it safer, Marcus replied. I think we've found our true mission, haven't we? As their plane lifted off into the evening sky, carrying them home to the small town where their journey had begun, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion. She had learned that heroism wasn't always about dramatic moments of physical courage. Sometimes it was about the quiet decision to stand up for what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and to believe that everyone, even those who had made terrible mistakes, deserved a chance at redemption. The work would continue. The challenges would evolve, and there would always be more students who needed advocates and more communities that needed healing. But Sarah Mitchell, former victim and current protector, teacher and warrior, was ready for whatever came next. After all, she had learned from the best, and she was married to a man who would always have her back, just as she would always have his. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.